All right, so this video is to walk you through assignment number 1 and give you kind of the background, the way that it works, and point out some things that people struggle with sometimes and lose points. So notice that the module gives you the assignment alignment and the course learning outcome. That's standard so that you understand how the assignments that I'm giving you correspond and align with what the university's goal is for Composition 1. Then underneath it, it says the assignment, there's some things that you're gonna have to read. There are things that you're gonna have to read. So the rhetorical techniques handout, read through it, look at the sections. I'm gonna pull it up right now on my computer. So some things to keep in mind. I'm walking you through what a rhetorical analysis is because you're going to have to eventually write one. So this is kind of just getting our feet wet a little bit. Starts off by argumentative stance, writer's purpose, intended audience, credibility, rhetorical effectiveness. That's the basic at the top of the handout of what you're going to have to do when analyzing someone else's piece of writing, a professional published piece of writing. The goal would be you would then, after taking part in this unit, start thinking about your own writing, and then how can you apply some of the things that you learned from these, we'll call them mentor texts, to your own argumentative research essay, which is the second thing that you'll work on this semester, the second big unit in writing assignment. There's a foundational 4. You're always thinking about the purpose. What was the motivation behind this being written? It could be to entertain, persuade, inform, a combination of 2 or all 3, where one is more dominant. The audience, who is the intended audience for the piece of writing? You might not be the intended audience. The older I get, the more commercials I watch, I realize I've grown. My age has excluded me from some of the demographics of the things that I see on television, even streaming commercials. So you always have to think about, am I the audience for this? Who is the intended audience? And then for that audience, is it effective? And how do they go about trying to, let's say, persuade, in the terms of like marketing, persuade someone to buy something, or if it's like a political speech, persuade you to do something like vote a certain way, or accept, some kind of way of looking at the world. And then credibility, there are 2 types of credibility. One is I have basic credibility based on my background, my education. So I might be a scientist who is talking to you about climate change, and my credibility comes from my background. So maybe I'm a PhD from MIT, and I currently teach at Stanford University, and I do different studies, and these are the results that I found. But there's another type of credibility too. The other type of credibility is the kind of credibility that I have sometimes when I write, because I'm an English teacher. That's one thing. That doesn't give me instant credibility when I write. Just because I have a background in writing and I'm skilled in writing doesn't mean everything I say or do is accurate or credible. I build my credibility, and if I was like a journalist, and there are some journalists for places like the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, that write weekly columns. They're not experts on everything they write about. So how do they build their credibility? You can't just say, well, I'm a journalist, it's true. They build their credibility on the backs of more knowledgeable others. So sometimes they do an interview with a more credible other, and sometimes they quote from more credible others. And that's what you're gonna do when you write your argumentative research essay. You're gonna build your credibility on the type of sources that you include and the credibility of the people that produced those sources. And then logical and emotional appeals. Logical appeals, facts, statistics, and then emotional appeals, kind of loaded language, and how I go about, or someone else goes about, trying to pull a certain emotion from you. Sadness, anger. To give you an example, sometimes during, and this is true on both sides, Republicans, Democrats, doesn't matter, when there's a State of the Union address and there's a war or conflict going on, usually one of the soldiers' widows or widowers is invited, and when they're talking about why the war needs to happen, they'll say, oh, the Silver Star winner, his wife or her husband is here, and they gave their life, and this is what happened. And that's an emotional appeal, because it's meant to put a face to the war, but also make it seem like it's meaningful. Look at the sacrifice this person made for our country, and look how meaningful and needful it is that we continue with the program, the war. The thing to remember, though, is, the technical term for these is logos and pathos. Logos, logical appeal; pathos, emotional appeal; ethos, credibility. But we don't use those in our writing. We use logical appeal, emotional appeal, credibility. So these foundational four are the bedrock of a rhetorical analysis. So usually people, they make it to college, and sometimes they've never written a rhetorical analysis. And the goal behind a rhetorical analysis is kind of deconstruct a piece of writing so we see how it works. Kind of like you take apart an engine, you kind of understand the way the different pieces work together, and the goal would be I could put it back together, but I could also fix it again, and I could maybe fix smaller things that are wrong with it. And by tinkering with it, the same thing would be with your writing. I'm going to take this mentor text apart to see how it works. Then I'm going to get a better understanding of how writing works at a professional level, and then I can tinker with my own writing to see if I can figure out a way to make my own writing better. It's not something that is going to be like a quick fix, but it's something that can kind of give you that aha moment and go, okay, I can start paying attention to these things. So at its simplest, you're going to take a text and you're going to look at the purpose, the audience, the credibility of the writer or the speaker, their logical and emotional appeals. That's the basic. And then the sophisticated and stylish 30 are all the little things. And I'm going to ask you to try to push yourself to identify some of these. And I'll kind of point out some things right now. Enumeratio, the writer supplies a list of details about something. So, you could pull your finger down an article without even reading it and look for a bunch of commas. So there's a list of a bunch of different things. That's enumeratio. And then I give you in the handout, why do writers do that? Because in your rhetorical analysis, you can then borrow that language to talk about why, if you found it in your article, why that writer might have been doing that. So that's the purpose of this handout, is to give you examples and then some language you can use to try to understand why writers do the things that they do. Let's see another one. Procatalepsis is just a big word for anticipating a counter argument. It's something you're going to have to do in your argumentative essay. You're much more likely to persuade someone if you can anticipate kind of an itch that they have in their brain while you're talking to them or writing something, and you're not even there to explain if they have a question, and you can kind of scratch that itch for them by anticipating whatever counter argument they might have, something they're confused about, so that when they walk away, they're more likely not to go, well, let's put a pin on that and I'll come back to it, because they probably won't, and they're more likely to be swayed and persuaded by what you're saying. Hypophora and rhetorical question. These are two easy ones. You can pull your finger down an article, look for question marks. If it's a question mark, it's a question and it's not answered, it's a rhetorical question. And you can look here, why? Why is it used? Well, a well-used rhetorical question will engage readers by leading them to their own discovery of the point you want to make. For this reason, reserve rhetorical questions for the most crucial points you want to make. So if you find one in a piece of writing, it's most likely a major point they're trying to make, and they're not trying to spell it out for you. They're trying to ask that question and that you'll supply the answer. Okay. On the flip side of that, another type of question, and there are only two, there's rhetorical question, there's hypophora. Hypophora, you ask a question, you answer it. Why would you do that? Well, if it's used at the beginning of a paragraph, it can help guide the reader from point to point through an essay, and it can be used to anticipate questions or concerns readers might have. So again, there's the point that's being made, right? So you can identify it, and then I'm also giving you an example and then a reason why, so that you can start to kind of see the reasons why writers do that. And then when you decide, I'll work a question into my writing, am I going to answer it or not? And if I answer it, this is why I'm doing it. And if I don't answer it, it's a rhetorical question, and this is why I'm doing it. This is my intended effect. So to get back to the assignment, the goal is you're going to read that handout on rhetorical analysis, and then you are going to read an article called Disability by Nancy Mayers. Then you're going to open a set of Google Slides. And the Google Slides, so the reason you're going to read Nancy Mayers' article Disability is because I have a Google Slides that I use in a class when I teach it face-to-face. And it goes through all the things that I just talked to you about, the rhetorical techniques handout, the foundational four, the purpose, the audience, her credibility, all of that. So it's integral, number one, that you do the reading week to week, because it all is building towards something. And so I'm looking at the rhetorical techniques handout, so I'm understanding what is a rhetorical analysis, what are the big foundational pieces. Then I'm reading an article. Then Mr. Ruoff is providing me with a Google Slides that's literally walking me through taking it apart and then putting it back together and giving an example of what a rhetorical analysis thesis statement looks like. Then you'll read The Case for File Cabinets by Pamela Paul, which is a pretty interesting, kind of weird article. Pamela Paul used to be a columnist for the New York Times, and then she became the editor, but she's no longer the editor of the opinion section. But you will read that, and then it says, use the rhetorical techniques to help you provide examples of at least 3 specific rhetorical techniques Pamela Paul uses in The Case for File Cabinets. That could be purpose, that could be audience, that could be logical and emotional appeals. So does she use any facts and statistics? Does she reference anyone that's a credible source? Does she use any loaded language to try to draw at your emotions? And then beyond that, try to look at the sophisticated and stylish 30. Like, the easiest you could do is draw your finger down the article and look for question marks. Does she have a question and she doesn't answer it? Okay, there's a rhetorical question. Does she have a question but she does answer it? Hypophora. Things like that. And then look through the other examples and just see if you can identify some of that stuff. And then the third part, finish by providing your own thoughts on Nancy Mayers' essay and Pamela Paul's essay. So the one, disability, the other, the case for file cabinets. Are there any subtle or interesting similarities, any important differences? Discuss how both writers balance logical and emotional appeals. All that means is most writers use, that's why it's foundational, logical and emotional appeals. Some people are logic heavy, a lot of facts, a lot of statistics, a lot of quotes, interviews. And then on the other side, some people are very emotional appeal heavy. It's a lot of loaded language, a lot of trying to appeal to senses of hatred, anger, sadness, like that, and trying to get a rise out of someone. But on the flip side, not to make it all doom and gloom, to give an example, a comedian. Let's say you pay big money to go see a comedian in person, and their goal is most likely to entertain you. So they want to make you laugh, and laughing creates relatability. And so some comedians, their whole goal is just entertainment, but then think about some comedians, it's entertainment, but it's also persuading and informing, because they might talk about topical issues, like hot button issues as well. So they're making you laugh, which makes you more susceptible to their message, which might be about things that are actually going on in politics or the world in general. So they all kind of have this interplay working together. So, you would talk about, if I went to a political rally, am I getting a lot of facts and statistics, or am I getting a lot of emotionally charged language? If I went to a comedian's, not a concert, but I went to a stand-up act, am I getting just entertainment, or am I also getting persuaded and informed of things? And so you would then talk about the balance of those things. Am I getting a lot of logic? Am I getting a lot of emotion? So you can talk about those. The most important thing to do this week, though, is to read all the readings. And then, like for number 1, it says, discuss what you have learned from Reading Disability by Nancy Mayers, going carefully through the Google Slides, reading carefully through the rhetorical techniques handouts. What I'm looking for is you have a point about each of those things, saying like, I read them. So Mr. Ruff, here's what I know about Disability by Nancy Mayers. Here's what I know from going through the Google Slides. Here's what I saw and noticed from the rhetorical techniques handout. And this is what I, at this point, think a rhetorical analysis is a writing task. That's part 1. Part 2, I've read the case for file cabinets, and here are 3 examples of rhetorical techniques. And then number 3, I am providing my own thoughts on Mayers and Pamela Paul's essay. Here are some interesting or subtle similarities. Here are some differences. And then here's how they balance logical and emotional appeals. It's 750 words for the entire thing, 1, 2, and 3. And then I'm going to look at, do you have at least 250 words for 1, 250 words for 2, 250 words for 3. Those are minimum word counts. That's the minimum if I can say what I got to say in the most concise way possible and hit the main ideas. Not everyone writes that way. If that's not you, you're probably going to go beyond 250 words, and that's okay. The most important thing to remember is I'm answering all parts. That way I can get full credit. Okay? So let's start off the first assignment strong. Hopefully I've given you some focal points to focus in on. And if you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to email me. And let's get off to a great start.